This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Impeachment proceedings begin against Taiwan's president. The opposition accusing William Lai of violating the constitution. A move experts say is symbolic, but also a sign of deepening division within the island's parliament. Now, Hong Kong's John Lee says national integration and post-disaster relief for the deadly Tai Po fire are top priorities for the new LegCo and the government as it convenes for its first meeting. Now, President Trump rebukes Greenland's leader for rejecting US ties in favour of Denmark as Danish and Greenlandic diplomats head to the White House for talks on the island's future. Also, China's exports end 2025 on a strong note, driving the country's trade surplus to a record high, even as US tariffs bite. Ahead on the bulletin, does artwork generated by an artist using AI warrant copyright protection? Well, that's a dispute playing out in courtrooms across China as its creative sector embraces the tech, egged on by the government's push for AI integration. Now, the impeachment case against Taiwan President William Lai has moved into a new phase, with public hearings beginning in Parliament. It's only the second time in the island's democratic history that a sitting president has faced an impeachment. So how did Taiwan get here? Well, the island has been in political gridlock since the 2024 election. Mr. Lai won the presidency, but his Democratic Progressive Party lost its majority in parliament. Control then went to the opposition Kuomintang and its smaller ally, the Taiwan People's Party. Well, that divide has fueled repeated legislative clashes, with things coming to a head late last year. The opposition passed a legal amendment in November to make it easier to allocate tax revenues between local and central governments. But in an unprecedented move, the government refused to enact those changes, saying that the plan was fiscally unsound and carried out without proper consultation. Well, the opposition in turn called Mr. Lai an emperor, accusing him of undemocratic practices and moved to remove the president. Well, the only other impeachment bid was more than 15 years ago during the presidency of Chen Shui-bian. Now, similar to back then, the opposition lacks a two-thirds majority in parliament, making this latest effort unlikely to succeed. Well, CNA's senior correspondent Victoria Jen joins us live now from Taipei. Vic, just walk us through some of the highlights from today's hearings.
Well, today's public hearing focused on whether President William Lai overstepped his authority by backing the cabinet's decision not to implement certain laws passed by Parliament. Now, both the opposition and the ruling parties have sent representatives to attend the hearing. Opposition lawmakers and invited scholars argue that ignoring legislation passed by a parliamentary majority undermines democracy and creates constitutional instability. Now, the ruling DPP strongly pushed back. They say it was the opposition that passed policies that may violate the Constitution and argue that the president and the cabinet had a constitutional duty not to implement such laws. The DPP also criticized the opposition for focusing on impeachment instead of passing the national budget, warning that prolonged political confrontation could hurt governance. Now, several scholars and legal experts representing both sides of the House echoed concerns about constitutional order. Now, let's hear what they had to say.
如果我们40%的选票要对60%的选票完全视而不见，要对国会的1/2视而不见，要对复议失败的案子仍然坚持要送大法官的宪法法庭去释宪，用司法来解决政治上少数的事实，我觉得这个是宪政上动荡不安的关键。
那提弹劾呢，在我们宪法增修条文第4条第7项的规定，它必须要经过立法委员2/3以上之决议，所以在程序上看得出来是法律实务上不可能。法律事务上不可能，因为目前蓝白只有过半，他能提的只有 这个倒戈。而对于2/3的席次，显然门槛是不足的。那在明显未达门槛的情况下，还要提出，这是宪政上的打假球。
So, Vic, what's been some of the reactions to the opposition's push to impeach the president?
Well, looking ahead, the impeachment process is set to continue. President Lai is expected to be invited to speak next week in the next round of hearings, where he will respond directly to the accusations. But whether he will actually attend remains unclear at this point. After that, any formal impeachment motion would still need a final vote in Parliament, requiring a 2/3 majority on May 19th. And given the opposition doesn't have those numbers, the motion is widely expected to fail. Now, there is a general sense of fatigue among many Taiwanese who are sick and tired of the constant political wrangling between the ruling and opposition parties. Some people say they don't fully agree with President Lai's approach, but still feel impeachment is unrealistic. And others believe that the move is more about political confrontation than real outcomes. Here's what some people told us on the street.
我说赖清德做事情的方式，还有他的一些观念，我没有很赞成。对，但他毕竟是民选总统，要罢免他大概也很难呐。
有一些东西政策是明知道不会过的，然后就只是为了闹事而闹事，所以我就觉得意义不大。
So the hearings will continue, but the political reality remains unchanged. Impeachment is unlikely to pass, but the debate is keeping tensions high inside and outside of Parliament.
Right, many thanks for that report. CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen in Taipei. Meantime, Hong Kong officials are looking to expand oversight of building maintenance projects after a fire in Tai Po last November that killed more than 160 people. Now, the proposal was raised as the city's newly elected Legislative Council, or LegCo, convened the first meeting of its term. Chief Executive John Lee opened the session saying that the blaze exposed the need for reform, and he has pledged a thorough investigation. The fire at Wong Fuk Court in Tai Po in Hong Kong's new territories killed 161 people and left thousands homeless overnight. It was the deadliest disaster to hit the city in recent times. And Deborah Wong joins us live now from Hong Kong for more. Deborah, walk us through some of the highlights from today's session, as well as some of the developments that we can expect.
So the Tai Po issue really dominated the entire council session, the first session of the new term. And Chief Executive John Lee, he addressed the session, he addressed the lawmakers, and he used quite stern language really to underline the gravity of the situation regarding Tai Po. Have a listen.
我再次重申，我會一問到底，問責到底。任何人如果需要負上責任，無論佢係政府或者非政府人員，無論佢係基層或者高層，都會按事實追責懲處。
So it's quite clear here that the issues that are raised, there's an acknowledgement here that the issues cut across the public as well as the private space. And Mr. Lee is very keen to stamp them out, to weed them out. And we've heard several proposals from the EXCO members as well today. Now, these include matters relating to construction safety. We're looking at things like having stiffer penalty regime and inspection process for high-rise buildings. We're also looking at potentially enhancing the role of the Urban Renewal Authority, perhaps giving them powers to do background checks on consultants and contractors to check on whether they have any criminal records. And we're also looking at potentially a smoking ban in the works now, being imposed at all construction sites. So much of the conversation later then steered to the issue of resettlement, because that's what a lot of lawmakers and residents are keen to provide their views on. And we've heard that the government is actually considering the redevelopment of Wong Fuk Court. But they also caution that even though it's one of the options, it's going to take at least 9 to 10 years, because that it will include demolition. It will also include sorting out a lot of property ownership issues, among the residents. We have to take note that there are over 4,000 households there. So all these is going to be a mammoth task. Now, lawmakers also suggest that residents should have a say, but they also need to balance time and the cost. And also, social work has to be more coordinated as well. So we heard suggestions on how to have an interdepartmental platform to address these concerns. But, the session will still continue, and we will hear more proposals in the week ahead. Terry.
Deborah Wong live in Hong Kong. Thanks for that. Donald Trump has rebuked Greenland's leader for expressing a preference to remain with Denmark rather than to join the United States.
Well, that's their problem. That's their problem. I disagree with him. I don't know who he is, don't know anything about him, but that's going to be a big problem for him.
Denmark and Greenland's top diplomats are gathering in the White House to discuss the Arctic island's future. And they will be meeting US Vice President Vance and State Secretary Marco Rubio. Now, the primary focus will likely be on Mr. Trump's increased interest in taking control of Greenland, quote, whether they like it or not. The U.S. leader has suggested he will have the island either the easy way or the hard way, citing national security needs due to the presence of Russian and Chinese ships in the region. Ross Cullen is covering the story for CNA, and he joins us live from Greenland's capital, Nuuk. Ross, so what is Denmark and Greenland hoping to achieve out of these talks with the U.S.?
Well, Ateli, I think to start with, they would want a bit of education about where Greenland is and what the structure of the government is here, because you just heard the US President saying he knows nothing about the Greenlandic Prime Minister. So they would want to lay out to JD Vance and Marco Rubio exactly what the relationship is between Greenland and Denmark. And we did see a united front from the two Prime Ministers, from Mette Frederiksen and Jens Frederik Nielsen. They spoke on a Tuesday in a joint news conference to lay the groundwork for those crucial talks taking place later today in the US capital. We can listen in now to a little bit more of what Mette Frederiksen had to say.
Vi vil gerne dialogen, og vi vil gerne samarbejde. Vi søger ikke nogen konflikt, men vores budskab er klart. Grønland er ikke til salg. Det har vi gjort klart fra starten, ligesom vi fra begyndelsen af alt det her har sagt til amerikanerne, at hvis det handler om sikkerhed, så er der meget mere, vi kan og skal gøre i fællesskab.
Well, Mette Frederiksen has taken a hard line throughout this. She has decried what she sees as unacceptable pressure from our closest ally. And she was joined at that news conference by the Greenlandic Prime Minister. Greenland is a self-governing Danish territory, so Greenland does have its own parliament and Prime Minister for domestic affairs, although Copenhagen still runs defence and foreign affairs. We can listen in now to what Jens Frederik Nielsen had to say.
Men en ting skal alle forstå. Grønland vil ikke ejes af USA. Grønland vil ikke styres af USA. Grønland vil ikke være en del af USA. Vi vælger det Grønland, vi kender i dag, og som er en del af kongeriget Danmark.
So, Ross, actually, how much of a threat does Chinese and Russian ships in the Arctic pose to the U.S.? And also, what about the residents of Greenland? I mean, what do they think of Mr. Trump's interest in the island?
Well, in terms of the Chinese influence, Telly, in the region, undoubtedly there is a big Chinese presence in the Russian Arctic, but when Donald Trump says that this region is covered with Russian and Chinese ships, that's not the case, according to maritime experts and strategic institutes that monitor the North Atlantic Ocean, and particularly the Norwegian Sea between Norway, Iceland and Greenland. They do say that there is an increasing Chinese influence in terms of the number of icebreakers it has, and it's working very closely with Russian patrol ships. But Greenland has refused China permission to buy a naval port. Greenland has also chosen not to have Huawei run its 5G network, so there have already been pushback from Greenland against this growing Chinese influence. But in terms of what Beijing says, it just rules it out, saying the Arctic is a place for the international community, for joint interests, saying that the United States should not use other countries, so Greenland, to pursue or as an excuse to pursue its own private interests. And just one word about the people here in Nuuk. They are worried, they are concerned, they don't want to be American. They don't want to be Danish. They want to have an independent future when the economy is in a strong enough place to be able to pursue that. But for now, if they have to make a choice, they would rather stick with Denmark. Ateli?
Many thanks for that report, Ross Cullen for CNA in Greenland. Where we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, the US signals a softer line on China tech, allowing restricted Nvidia chip sales. Plus, China's market regulators take measures to cool a red-hot stock rally. Hello again. You're watching EAT, or rather East Asia Tonight, and I've got Roland Lim now joining us with the very latest in business. So, Roland, US, apparently they're ready to ship its second most advanced chip to China, but China says, I don't want it. What's that all about?
Yeah, previously, in response to President Trump's overtures to sell AI chips to China, Beijing called on its own developers to shun Nvidia's H200 chips. But this week, it's gone one step further. The US has opened the door for Nvidia to sell advanced artificial intelligence chips to China under strict conditions, following through on a policy shift announced last month by President Trump. Nvidia can now sell its second most powerful H200 chip to Chinese buyers, subject to approval. Now, each chip will be reviewed by an independent testing lab to verify its AI capabilities before shipment. And China will be limited to no more than 50% of the total number of chips sold to US customers. Chinese buyers must also demonstrate sufficient security safeguards and certify that the chips will not be used for military purposes. Sales of Nvidia's most advanced processors will remain blocked. President Trump said last month the sales would be permitted in exchange for a 25% fee paid to the US government. China hawks have criticized the move, calling it a major mistake that could boost China's military and economy. At the same time, questions remain over demand, as Beijing has reportedly been urging companies to use domestically produced chips instead. And there are reports, customs authorities saying the H200 chips are not permitted to enter China. China's domestic artificial intelligence ambitions just got a boost after startup Zhipu released a new AI model fully trained using Huawei's chips. Now, Zhipu's announcement marks a milestone for Huawei, as it's the only major AI firm in China to publicly show off its success. The AI startup was placed on a US blacklist last year, which limited its ability to procure American chips, leading it to work with domestic chip makers such as Capricorn Tech. Zhipu's move is in line with Beijing's policy to reduce reliance on foreign chips for its AI push. Shares of Zhipu AI ending the day up 18.8% last week. The startup went public in Hong Kong, raising more than $550 million. China's trade continued its record run in the final month of 2025, with exports rising at its fastest pace in 3 months. Outbound shipments rose 6.6% on year US dollar terms in December, soaring past market estimates and higher than in November. Imports also grew by more than expected. And that's despite a bruising trade war between Washington and Beijing that led to a 20% plunge year-on-year in China's exports to the US, with imports falling around 15%. But other trade partners more than filled the gap, bumping up overall exports by 5.5% in 2025, lifting the trade surplus to a record $1.2 trillion. And economists expect the country to continue gaining global market share this year. A Chinese firm setting up overseas production hubs that would provide lower tariff access to the US are expected to drive that growth. At the same time, China's property slump and falling investments have restrained the country's appetite for foreign goods. Plus, there are worries about what the trade surplus says about flagging domestic demand and about the future of the trade truce with the US. China's market regulator says it is opening a probe into online travel giant Trip.com over alleged monopolistic practices. Now, regulators accusing the largest online travel agency for abusing its dominant market position without elaborating on the allegations. Trip.com says it'll cooperate with the investigation and implement regulatory requirements. This is not the online travel agent's first brush with authorities. Last year, regulators in Zhengzhou City summoned company representatives and ordered them to overhaul its practices to ensure fair competition, which includes revising contract clauses, optimizing pricing tools, and establishing stricter internal oversight. Shares of Trip.com dropped more than 6% in Hong Kong today. Greater China markets started the day on a strong footing, driven by AI-related shares, but reversed gains after regulators tightened margin requirements in a surprise move to cool a red-hot stock market. Shanghai Composite ending the day down 0.3%, second bourse the Shenzhen component managing to hold on to gains up 0.56%. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index also up by about the same margin. And a quick check on the Chinese currency, it remains flat at 6.972 to the dollar. The bourses in Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing will raise the minimum margin requirement for new borrowings to 100%, and that's up from 80% starting January 19th. The move comes after onshore stock turnover surged to a record 3.7 trillion yuan. That's about $530 billion the previous session. Outstanding margin financing also climbed to an all-time high of more than $372 billion. The exchanges say the tighter rules are aimed at protecting investors and supporting the market's long-term healthy development. The change reverses steps taken back in August of 2023 when margin requirements were eased to help revive trading activity. Metals extending gains as investors bet on more US rate cuts and economic revival in China, with gold, silver, copper all hitting record highs. Gold futures is currently at $4,643 per ounce. It's up nearly 1%. Silver passing that $90 mark earlier in Asian trade is now $89.94. Copper is up 0.57%. And tin outshining other base metals, it's up by as much as 6% at one point, settling at 3.25% higher. Copper prices have been supported by mining disruptions, deficit concerns this year, and increased shipments to the US ahead of possible tariffs, tightening supply elsewhere. Analysts say investors are also funneling more funds into tin, betting on surging demand for the metal used in semiconductors that underpin the AI boom. Safe haven appeal driving precious metal prices. And that'll do it for business, Telly.
But I'll see you back in a short while, Roland, I believe. I look forward to that. Well, we are moving on to our next top story now. South Korea's prosecutors have taken the rare step of seeking the death penalty for former President Yoon Suk-yeol, charging him with masterminding an insurrection through his brief declaration of martial law in December 2024. Well, the move has sparked debate over justice, accountability, and human rights. CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk has more.
The trial of Yoon Suk-yeol on charges of insurrection has been ongoing for about 9 months, since it began in April last year. During that time, the court held dozens of hearings, heard multiple witnesses, and reviewed extensive evidence related to its brief martial law declaration. On Tuesday, prosecutors demanded the death penalty, arguing that Yoon's actions threatened South Korea's constitutional order and democracy. Analysts say Yoon's trial could test how South Korea balances accountability for a former president with its human rights obligations. South Korea has not carried out a death sentence in nearly 3 decades and is bound by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Chung Chung-lee, leader of the ruling Democratic Party, welcomed the death penalty recommendation.
자신은 내란과 비상계엄을 꿈꾸면서 헌정 질서를 유린하고 민주주의를 짓밟겠다는 꿈에 쌍기역도 꿈꿀 수 없도록 이번에 확실하게 매듭을 지어야 합니다.
But human rights groups, including Amnesty International, caution against the use of the death penalty, saying that while no one is above the law, seeking execution is a step backward. It said accountability can and should be ensured without resorting to execution. Public opinion is divided. In one phone survey of about 1,000 adults, about 37% supported the death penalty, while roughly 41% favored life imprisonment or life without parole. Around 22% were unsure. In a separate poll, support for execution was higher, particularly among people in the 40s and 50s, with slightly more than half of all respondents in favor. Both surveys were conducted by broadcaster Kim Jun, known for his progressive leading channel. The court is scheduled to reach a verdict on February 19th. Lim Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Well, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the Japanese Prime Minister reportedly planning to call snap elections in February. Professor Seijiro Takeshita from the University of Shizuoka will be joining us to give his insights on what this move may mean for Sanae Takaichi. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Public hearings begin in Taiwan as opposition parties seek to impeach President William Lai over alleged violations of the Constitution. Hong Kong's newly elected Legislative Council convenes for the first time. Chief Executive John Lee lays out key priorities for the city, aligning with China's development plans and tackling reforms following the deadly Tai Po fire. And Donald Trump rebukes Greenland's leader for saying that his island prefers to remain with Denmark, ahead of crucial three-way talks at the White House on the territory's future. The Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is set to dissolve the House of Representatives when the ordinary diet session convenes in the coming week. Well, that's according to the Secretary General of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Well, Ms. Takaichi is expected to explain her plans on Monday, with the move aimed at paving the way for an election to strengthen her mandate. The cabinet is enjoying approval ratings of about 75%, but the ruling bloc holds just a slim majority in the lower house, limiting its ability to push through her ambitious policy agenda. We've got plenty to unpack here, and here to join us for more insights, Seijiro Takeshita, Professor of Management and Information at the University of Shizuoka. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. First, let's just start with the big picture question. Prime Minister Takaichi's snap election plan. What is the advantage of her moving this quickly? And do you see any blind spot in that calculation?
Well, as you just noted, she's got very high popularity. She and her cabinet's got 75% popularity rating. But let's not forget that the LDP support by the public is only 37. So this is where she wants to utilize her and her cabinet's popularity and raising, the profile of LDP. So basically, it would be very easy for her and her cabinet to conduct very touchy issues. For example, like security issues. We have to increase our, defense spending, which we need. It's a very touchy subject in Japan, and also increase of taxes as well. So, all these things, which is going to be very difficult, very rocky. It would be a lot easier if the LDP obviously have a majority. So obviously this is a time that she wants to utilize her and her cabinet's popularity into doing so. But regarding your second question, the problem is that in Japan, we have a fiscal year starting in April, meaning that if she has a snap election in February, it means the fiscal year 26 budget isn't going to go through. So she's going to have to form an interim budget, which basically is going to cause a bit of havoc or chaos, especially in the regional government side.
Yeah, because dissolving the lower house on the very first day of the ordinary diet session seems kind of rare. And just picking up on what you said, about, how Takaichi is trying to bank on the number, 75% popularity rate there. But just help us understand how bankable is this number like that going into an election? And do you foresee any kinds of missteps or events that could perhaps, erode that support just as quickly?
At this point, I don't see, people basically blocking this because, well, you look at the stock market, it's risen 3% yesterday and it was up 1.5%, a big boost on back of expectation that her expansion of fiscal policy of 20 trillion yen, et cetera, will go on, which basically is considered very positive, very forward-looking for the economy as a whole. And the public is backing it up because basically she is not wishy-washy. She's very straightforward. And for that reason, I don't find many people who would oppose it, except that, the smaller the party, it's very difficult to go for snap election because firstly, you don't have much time and smaller parties don't have much money. And it takes money to do these elections. And, for that reason, there could be a lot of complaints from, their coalition members or, a lot of, I would say, parties who may be opposing, but very close to LDP. There are many parties like that. So there could be a lot of complaints coming from these people. But basically, if you look at the bigger picture, I think this, election will probably go on.
So inside the LDP, you're saying that Ms. Takaichi's position is pretty secure right now? Is that what we can assume?
Yes, at this point, it'd be very difficult to argue against her regime, I think. And, one of the positive things that, Ms. Takaichi did was when she was forming her cabinet, she was going for old Japan cabinet. In other words, she wasn't going for those factional member, I would say, favoritism, which is what you see very often in Japanese politics. You become a prime minister and you do a thank you to all these different factions and make them the minister. So they're looking at politics rather than policies. But in this case, in Takaichi-san's case, she wasn't like that. She went for the policies. And the Japanese public acknowledges that. So, that's one of the reasons why I think she's getting a pretty good support, not only from the public, but also from the LDP members itself.
So, well, the government is pushing this record fiscal 2026 budget, but we still have inflation. That's still a backdrop. So if an election disrupts the budget timetable, how politically costly can this possibly be?
That's a good point because I would say fear of inflation is definitely the biggest headache. Now, Japan is the only country in the past 20 years which didn't have, a wage rise amongst G7 nations. And finally, we're starting to do that. But, since last year, we've started to do that. But still, if you look at the real income level, it's still under because we're getting inflation for the first time in more than 2 decades. But that said, our inflation isn't, demand pull inflation is cost push inflation. So it's not as serious as, UK or America. But that said, of course, we're very vulnerable to imported prices without a speck of doubt. And continuous weakening the yen could exacerbate this, inflationary condition. So this is the biggest headache that she has to face from here onwards.
Also, we're assuming that this is all going to plan, but under what sort of circumstances do you see that this snap election not happening at all?
It could not happen if, again, there's a lot of opposition from within the LDP or, from other friendly parties, complaining about it. And also the fact that, if people start to focus on the fact that, fiscal 26 budget wouldn't go through in time, that could cause a lot of, confusion in various parts of segments in Japan. So, this could be something that could be criticized. And also, we're getting so much elections. For God's sake, we had 17, major election in past 30 years. And I don't think you have any countries like that. So, again, this is, costing a lot of money and time. So there could be some criticism about this excessive frequency and utilization of power to have these snap elections. That could be agenda that could be coming up.
Right, 17 elections and counting. Well, thanks so very much for helping us unpack what is at stake here. Seijiro Takashita, Professor of Management and Information at the University of Shizuoka. Well, meantime, Japan's diplomatic row with China is casting a shadow on its economy as Beijing exerts pressure through tourism and trade policies. And now, its minister in charge of fiscal policy says it is monitoring the impact. But Prime Minister Takaichi's plans to dissolve parliament and call a snap election, according to her ruling party, are raising concerns among some observers. CNA's senior correspondent Michio Ishida files this report.
Japan's economy is projected to grow 1.3% in 2025 and just 0.8% this year due to a slowdown in exports, consumption, and investment, according to the World Bank. And there are concerns among Japanese businesses that they could be further hit as Beijing, its largest trading partner, ramps up economic pressure on Tokyo amid a diplomatic spat. Inbound tourism from China slowed in November, while Japanese media say some Japanese goods such as sake are facing delays in customs clearance. Japan's Minister of State for Economic and Fiscal Policy addressed the concerns at a briefing with foreign media on Wednesday.
中国側の一連の措置による影響を含めてですね、これにつきましては引き続き状況を注視したいというふうに思います。日本政府としてはですね、中国との間で双方の努力により課題と懸案を減らしていくこと、そして理解と協力を増やしていく方針。
The diplomatic row began when Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi made remarks about a Taiwan contingency in November that angered Beijing, which regards the island as part of its territory. She has rebuffed China's demands to retract her comments. Without referring to China specifically, Mr. Kyuchi said the government's growth strategy allows it to reduce risks on the economy.
The core of the growth strategy is investments that enhance resilience against potential crisis, a so-called crisis management investment, proactively address various risks and societal challenges in areas such as economic security, food security, and energy security.
Some political watchers in Japan, however, say a snap election could stall the implementation of policies. In particular, a $115 billion supplementary budget approved in December, and the passage of next year's national budget. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, how legal battles taking place in Chinese courtrooms may affect artworks generated by artificial intelligence. Now, a new cultural revolution of sorts is sweeping China's creative industry. With Chinese AI tools being increasingly affordable, accessible, and powerful,
it's changing the way artwork is being made, be it for appreciation or marketing. And that's disrupting the creative industry in China to an extent not seen elsewhere.
Right, to discuss more, let's bring in CNA senior correspondent Han Yuguan live from Shanghai. So, Yuguan, we know that with AI now capable of generating marketing artwork with just a few prompts, I suppose creative professionals are finding themselves being replaced by technology?
Yes, to some extent, yes. But the profession is certainly of a case of if you can't beat them, join them. Because with AI integration being promoted by the government here, many Chinese creative professionals are adopting AI as a tool in their creative process. A Shanghai Jiao Tong University study surveying about 110 visual artists published 2 years ago already found that 87% use AI in at least one stage of creation. Now that these AI-assisted creations are flooding the market, they are planting the seeds for a new legal conundrum. Does AI artwork generated by artists warrant copyright protection? After all, aren't AI models themselves trained on vast data sets of creative works to begin with? These questions are brewing court battles across China. Now, to give our viewers a sense of the issues being examined, my team zoomed in on 2 particular cases. We also visited an art exhibition of AI art here in Shanghai. Let's take a look. At this art exhibition in Shanghai, many artists featured here are not human. They are machines. Aptly named Prompt Escape, this exhibition shows what creativity looks like in an age where AI isn't just a tool, but a collaborator. The exhibition has ended its run in Shanghai, but in China, court battles over AI-assisted creations like these are far from over. At the center of those battles lies a fundamental question. Does artwork generated by AI, created based on vast data sets of creative works to begin with, deserve copyright protection? Lin Chen, known professionally as Tu Dou Man, was at the front line of one such battle in 2024 to protect the copyright of one of his AI-assisted creations.
当时正好是情人节，2023年，我通过 Midjourney 进行一个最早期的生成，就是这个爱心在江面上有一个导引，沟通了几个小时以后，就有一颗爱心躺在了上海的黄浦丹的那个江面上。通过 Photoshop 对它进行了修改，改成了半颗星星，这样就映衬了这么一个 idea， 星星正好2个碰在一起，变成了一个完整的星。
这个就是最后的作品，打官司的也是这个作品。
对，那时候也是这个。
Lin filed his lawsuit after he saw a video showing a 3D installation of his artwork on a lake in neighboring Jiangsu province. The company behind the installation even used a picture very similar to his artwork for an online ad.
这是客户想要的效果，这是我们做出来的效果。
我觉得这是件非常愤怒的事情。然后我平复下来以后，我其实做的第一件事情就是联系这个地产公司，地产公司并不予以回应。我觉得这有一点点的傲慢，然后我联系这家气膜公司，气膜公司认为他们以前做了很多在水上的半个太阳、半个月亮，今天他们做了半颗爱心，他不认为使用了我的内容侵权了，所以我发起了诉讼。
Lawyer Deng Yile is defending the copyrights of another AI-assisted artwork. Her client created this artwork with AI. He later found a Chinese cybersecurity firm using a marketing image which bore a striking resemblance to his creation. He decided to sue, but Deng's client found himself being sued for defamation instead.
在 AI 时代，它的侵权因为技术的发展，成本降低。我在取证，我在请律师和时间上需要花费1年甚至更长的时间。那么在经济成本上来说，我的取证是费用，我的调查是费用。
For Ling Chen, his lawsuit in 2024 resulted in a win, but with a twist. In a 27-page ruling, a length more typical of criminal cases, the judge ruled that the 2D image used in the balloon company's ad infringed on Lin's copyright. But the 3D installation on the lake did not. In the end, the judge awarded Lin 10,000 yuan in damages. That's about $1,400. But here's the kicker. Lin spent over 7 times that amount in legal fees alone.
对我来说也是一次学习。我看到了我自己在注册的时候的一些盲区。早期我的注册只是登记了一张平面图，哪怕我当时的这个作品名字写的是半星艺术装置，但是这也是一张平面图。我当时应该对它进行一个外观专利的注册，以 3D 或者雕塑、其他的艺术形态的形式演绎创作出来，就不会让对方或者一些侵权方找到一些漏洞，有机可乘。
With AI advancing at lightning speed in China, it's also a constant learning process for judges and lawyers.
在23年的文生图第一案中，我们可以看到的是，输入提示词的这个人，他构成一个创作者，进而这个人工智能生成物生成这个图片，可以构成所谓著作权法意义上的作品。但是随着技术的发展，到此刻，如果仅是以输入提示词，甚至是修改步数、参数等，目前图片已经没有办法作为人工智能生成物进行保护。这背后就体现着司法规则对于技术发展的一个回应。
With AI Plus now a national strategy and AI pumping out millions of works in China, the courts here are being forced to redefine the rules in real time, one case at a time. But those rules may well be a sneak peek into how originality and ownership could be redefined globally in the AI era.
So, Yuguan, in a nutshell, I mean, lawyers, judges alike are essentially playing catch-up with the AI technology. Now, I'm curious to know, what was the outcome for lawyer Teng's case? I mean, I noticed, rather, that you actually didn't mention that in your story.
Well, we couldn't include the outcome because her team was still debating which course of action to take to defend her client's AI-assisted work, since proof of prompts and changing of parameters no longer constitute enough human input for output to be considered copyrightable work. Her team has to consider other legal arguments. And for that, they're studying a relatively new document issued by the Supreme People's Court, which took effect just 2 weeks ago. It's the latest revision of the provisions on the causes of action for civil cases. In this version, there are a number of new causes of action related to protecting of IP of data. So even as we speak, lawyer Deng's team is filing their case under one of those causes of action. The argument being that her client's digital artwork constitute a unique set of data, and by using that data without permission to generate their own artwork, the defendants have infringed on her client's rights.
So, Yuguan, speaking of data, if that argument holds water, AI models themselves are trained on vast data sets of creative works. Does that then also constitute infringement of copyrights on an industrial scale? And, I mean, it seems like a very complex matter. I mean, is there a way out of this conundrum?
Well, there are a few schools of thought. In 2024, there was a petition calling for this unlicensed use of creative works for training generative AI to be stopped. The petition was initially signed by a group of more than 10,000 actors, musicians, and authors, mostly in the English medium. Prominent signatories include actress Julianne Moore, stand-up comic Rosie O'Donnell. Within months, the number of signatories swelled to 50,000. But that's one camp. Another school of thought suggests that we should treat creative knowledge as a public good and collectively fund its production. Like public broadcasting or roads, it should be accessible to everyone and paid for by everyone. It's food for thought.
But the designer in your story, Tuto Man or Linton, while he won his case, he lost a lot of money. He seems to have found a way, though, to work with AI in his professional life and to defend the rights of his work. Isn't that the case?
Yes, it's a classic case of someone who has taken on the maxim of if you can't beat them, join them. He started working AI very early on because he saw the writing on the wall that generative AI would be a beast he needs to tame, or he would be consumed by it. He had a valuable vantage point from 2014 to 2016. He worked as a full-time faculty member in the visual communication department of a university in Wuhan, and now he occasionally serves as a guest lecturer at several universities. He saw firsthand how some university programs were being discontinued because of AI. And now he's made a name for himself with AI-generated digital art that remixes modern consumer culture with Chinese aesthetics. They are hyper-realistic yet wildly imaginative. They bring to mind surrealist works of Salvador Dali mixed with the pop sensibility of Andy Warhol's Campbell soup cans. Some look like fan art of famous brands, and in the twist, some brands have come knocking on Tuto Man's door, commissioning his work for marketing campaigns or asking him to generate new concept art. And after fighting his own legal battle, he's learned how to document his input and to protect his copyright across all formats. You could say his journey represents the happy ending many hope for as we navigate this brave new world of generative AI.
And from what I can see, it seems like the lawyers are the only ones benefiting from all these lawsuits. Thank you so much for that story. Very, very interesting. CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. And on that note, we wrap up Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. As usual, you can find our headlines on CNA.Asia. We're also on Facebook and YouTube.
And we'll leave you with pictures of South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi bashing out a K-pop hit together, with Mr. Lee wrapping up his 2-day visit to Japan.
그렇죠. 이거 이제 박자를 맞추기.